Yes. Okay. All right. Cheese. Well, hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in to another delightful episode of Working Musicians, the original Working Musicians podcast. And as always, I am your host, Dris Organica, and I am an animal. And being the animal that I am, I have decided to have a little bit of a Pabst Blue Ribbon to help fuel this episode. But I only just started. I actually drank some Earl Grey tea earlier I wasn't feeling coffee because we drink coffee black. And, I like coffee as much as the next guy, but to me, coffee is more something that you drink because it gives you energy, especially when you drink it black. It's not something I really drink because I particularly enjoy it. It's just, that's when I need to help wake up in the morning. But when I'm trying to relax, the animal of me likes coffee, but the relaxing gentleman side of myself prefers a little Earl Grey tea with some honey. Oh, that's nice. That's good stuff. And it helps you with your voice a little bit. The other thing about if you drink coffee, you better be close to a bathroom. I mean, geez. That's what that stuff does to you. So salute. And that's entirely too much information, I know. Oh, yes. Oh, so there's some things I don't like to talk about on air, so to speak, because I don't like to date this show or kind of make it obvious what time or what year it is. I'm going to turn this mic preamp up a little bit. Oh, how's that? How's that? It's a little louder. I don't know. I feel like I need to turn it up some. How's that? Seems like I get a little more mojo. Are we louder yet? Oh, man. I don't know. I just don't feel like being that close up to the microphone. I mean, I could, but, oh, no wonder. Will it help if I turn the... Oh, well, no frickin' wonder. How's that? Is that making a bit of a difference? Oh, I would say so. Yeah, that seems to be a lot better. I just didn't feel like getting so close to the mic. And to be perfectly honest, I think it's for the better. There's just some things that, you only need to hear so close up. Plus, something else I noticed is that if I turn this mic preamp up, the Golden Age Project, past 60, it's not like a smooth, it's like a click. But I've noticed if I turn it past 60, it all of a sudden becomes a little bit more noisy. Like, whereas before, until I do that, it's like quiet. I wonder if I click it back, whether it gets quieter. Maybe. Or it could just be that it's picking up stuff in the background, because since I can hear it louder. Let me do a test. I'm going to turn it down just a little. Now I'm going to turn up my monitoring. I don't know if it's really that. I think it's just more so that because I have the microphone turned up, so to speak, I can hear what's going on behind me a little bit more. Maybe that's all it is. But just a little. But it's still, I'm sure this thing's pretty clean, but I mean, come on. This is not a super high-end preamp. I mean, once you get past 60 decibels, I mean, I expect it to make some noise. So no problem. I just went ahead and turned up the output a little bit. I want it turned up the output on my, what is this, DBX. It'll sound fine. It's fine. I don't even have the input on the DBXs turned all the way down, so because I want to try to keep that signal as clean as I can, but just using the pre-Golden Age. But at some point, I'm tired of being that close to the microphone. I want to relax a little bit. I kind of want to be off to the side, In fact, I'm going to reposition myself. There we go. Now I'm ready to roll. This might sound a little bit different going forward, but I just think it's a good idea to get away from the mic a little bit. I really do. I really think it's a good idea. So, what I was talking about before is I don't like to, talk too much about the current times because, a person might be listening to this 5 years from now and it kind of is off-putting. Like, I'll use some of my, like the home recording show, a show I was very fond of. There's some episodes that it's kind of hard to go back and want to listen to because, they're talking about some software that is now 5-6 years, who cares? Nobody cares about Pro Tools version 7 anymore, but that's what they're talking about. Or about some interface that's so out of date, Although you could say the same thing with mine. What I am talking about is, that the same could be said. Hell, I don't think they really make my interface anymore because it's Firewire. So, but I just bring it up, because I don't want to mention too much about things, but let's just say I was watching a football game today and man, both the teams I wanted to win lost. But what can you do? So I was a little disappointed about that. The wife's friend came over, we got the kids to sleep, and I'm like, well, they're happy, so I'm going to go up here and do something that makes me happy, which is a podcast. Makes me very happy. And I was just kind of looking around, I'm like, geez, I wonder if there was anything else I was going to get. Like, what would I get? I just got a new preamp, and that's basically blew my fun money for a little while. But, now that I've got, a couple of good preamps, now that it's working again, the DBX is a pretty solid stereo preamp and converters and all that stuff. That's nice. This Golden Age is different. I wouldn't call it super clean, but it's nice, a nice flavor. So I'm doing okay there, but it just, do I really need anything else? And the truth is, no, I really don't. There's a few things I've toyed around with, maybe getting a nice set of headphones for a change. But the way I go through them, it's like, who cares? To me, they're just a tool so I can hear stuff and not make noise, So, there's something to be said about that. But I don't know. I've kind of been feeling like maybe getting a nice compressor. I've got this Behringer, but it's fine for what I use it for, which is not much. But it'd be nice to get something pretty good. And there's a few of them. Really, there's like 3 that I've been toying around with. One of them I like considerably more than the other 2. But I forget what it's called. There's a Chameleon Labs that makes a stereo compressor that's very similar to a SSL style. Especially, you can compress anything with an SSL, but it's very widely accepted to be good on bus compressors, just like the SSL. But it can do anything. It is very transparent, which is nice. So, but the good thing is they're out enough to where you can find them used for, I think somewhere between, I want to say I've seen them for like $400, something like that used. I haven't looked in a while. I can't even remember the model number. I want to say like a 7720, but I could be totally wrong. But at any rate, new, I think they're about, in the $500 to $700 range, something like that. And then there's another one that's just right above that. Maybe that one's $700. I can't remember. But the point is used. I think I've seen them for about $300, $350, $400. So that's one that'd be the most ideal outside of actually getting an SSL, which what I do is completely overkill. But another couple I've thought about is, of course, the Art. They have some kind of a tube compressor, which I'm not overly excited about. I like it. I like hearing people say, "Oh, it's good for like a drum bus, or for like room mics. That's great. Or for I get it. Or for stereo room mics. Come on, you can use anything for that. But I guess what they're saying, especially with a lot of the cheaper condensers people use, it's nice to sort of have the tube to kind of darken the high a little bit. So I see that. But just from the reviews I've heard about it, I can't remember what it's called. I'm sure it's called like the Art Pro Comp or something like that. The Art MPA Pro Comp 2, something to that extent. I haven't looked at it in a while, but I think it goes for about 200. And that'd be pretty decent. I'm sure as long as you don't push it real hard, it'll be pretty transparent. But another one that I'm looking at, and I think I like even more, is Joe Meek makes one, and I can't remember what it's called. It might be the MC2. I can't remember, but it's basically a stereo compressor, which is nice. But it's also got it had some other little features that I thought were pretty cool. Like it's got a something to where you can. I'm sure it messes with the phasing a little bit, but it helps kind of enhance, widen, and narrow the width a little bit, which is kind of cool, especially because it gives you an out-of-the-box way to maybe widen up some guitars or overhead drums or something like that, or just a mix in general. I mean, that's something I would use sparingly. But in particular, it's got the optical compressor, which is, it may not be something that you would always want, but it would be something that you wouldn't necessarily outgrow. Whereas I think I would outgrow the Art compressor, at least more so than the other ones. But I mean, hey, at some point you need a compressor for your crush bus. Go ahead. That's fine. It'll do that. The Art will do that just fine, but a lot of people have had pretty good luck with that Art compressor, so I'm sure I wouldn't be too disappointed, but I don't know. It just seems like that's kind of, I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of the Art stuff. I think it's good value for the money, but I think it's kind of overly hyped because it is a good value for the money when there's pretty much nothing else out there. So I get it. Maybe that's what it is. I wouldn't call it good stuff. It's just as good as you can get without really spending serious money. So salute to that. I've also thought about maybe getting another mixing board, but truth is, I'd have to make it worth my while, I would have to get probably an Allen and Heath Mix Wizard, preferably a version 3. And I'll see those things used for around $500. That seems to be between $400 or $600. If that's about what they tend to go for, and that would be nice and all. But I don't know. It's a lot of money for something that I don't use that much. But the reason I don't use the Sun that much is because it doesn't have direct outputs. It doesn't have control room outs. It's old fashioned. It's noisy, so I can't really use the preamps. You can't do anything but a static mix on it. You start moving around pots and faders, and this thing gets the case of the gremlins and starts crinkling. So I'm sure if I actually had a much better working mixer, I would use that more. I don't know. But for what I usually use, it seems like overkill. But at any rate, it's just kind of funny. I guess the point of all this is it's kind of funny how you get to a point with your gear where you realize there's not things that you really need. I mean, I need some room treatment, but I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be in this house, so we'll see about that. I just hate to go build a bunch of stuff, which I could spend some money and build stuff. Granted, I can take it with me, but it's something else big and bulky I got to take with me. And I already got enough crap to potentially move. So, but it is kind of funny how our mind wanders. It's like, I think once you get to a certain position, it's kind of like for me to really upgrade my system, I would have to do something fairly drastic, and spend a pretty good amount of money on what I would just say like a new interface, get like an RME or something to that effect. Just get something much, much better than what I currently have as far as, converters and preamps go. But to be perfectly honest, what I have is fine. It's like for it to really get much better, RME, I don't know. That's I think where I would have to go at least, or probably higher, but it would just be so cost. RME is the highest I would go. After that, the cost becomes so stupid that you're not really getting anything better for your money. I mean, you are, but 220 times the price for 2% improvement, maybe a little more than that, but you get the idea. Diminishing gains. So it's just kind of weird because like I'm happy with what I got, but you always want more. And to be perfectly honest, there's not a whole lot more I really need to get to be happy. So especially for what I do, but yeah, definitely I would say it'd be nice to have a good external compressor. Nice stereo compressor would be real nice. Of course it would be nice to have some luscious, EQs and that kind of stuff, but I think really probably the next thing I'll do is just get a stereo compressor and I'll, save my nickels and dimes and, just keep my eyes open for a deal. Because I like me a deal. Oh, yeah. All right, so I don't know why, but I'm just like so short of breath. Probably because I've been yelling at the TV. Probably because I'm wearing these tight-ass pants. Driving me nuts. I'm going to loosen up my belt like a little bit. Here we go. Oh, now I'm breathing. I can already tell that I'm feeling better. But on today's episode, I figured I was going to talk about something that I don't really hear anyone else talk about in sort of the music community. That I think it's funny because everybody has them, yet we don't talk about them as something that is essential. We talk about all kinds of other gear that you have to have, but we don't talk about this. So on today's episode of Working Musicians Podcast, I wanted to talk about cars for musicians. All right, that's better. Sorry, I had to go stop for just a second and take off my pants and put on some shorts. I'm not here porky pigging it. I just had to put some different attire on to get comfortable because I just noticed it's like, geez, I'm not calm and relaxed, and I'm having to take these extra breaths. It was just kind of like I couldn't get a full breath of air. Still feel that way a little bit, but whatever. The show must go on. But I'm in shorts. Got my old Wrangler work pants off. Thank goodness those things are not very comfortable. Took my hat off, took a few deep breaths. We're zen. Zen. Yes, we're zen. Oh, it's so strange. It's like I can't get a full breath. Breathe. You ever feel like that way? It's just like no matter what you do, you can't get a full breath of air in. Maybe it's the way I'm sitting is bad. Maybe that's what it is. Let me move my chair up some. Maybe that's my problem. I'm sitting up. Feels better already. Yes, indeed. So today's episode is called Cars for Musicians. And, clearly everybody has to have a car pretty much. But obviously cars are a big deal. There's all kinds of shows dedicated to cars, whether it's about driving them, maintaining them, or collecting them, this, that, and the other thing, how to polish the wheels. You name it, there's an outlet for it when it comes to cars. But we don't generally talk about it a whole lot with musicians, right? It's not something that comes into scope. I mean, they might talk about, old memories about driving around the van, this, that, and the other thing, or being on tour, their first hatchback, whatever. But, there's not, and there's always people talking about gear and doing reviews. So that this is a good piece of gear for this, that, the other thing. We love to talk about gear, but we don't talk about one of the most important pieces of gear that we own, and that's our vehicle, right? Now, here in the last few years, I've become increasingly more interested in cars, less so as far as driving them. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like to drive a car, but sometimes it's kind of a curse because you sort of have to, and I'm tired of paying for them, that's for sure. But as a result of being tired of paying for them, in particular with the maintenance, so I kind of got into the mechanical side of cars and how to fix them. Like yesterday, I finally finished all the things I needed to do to get the maintenance up to date on my wife's Buick. So, gosh, what an interesting... I'm not going to go talk good or bad about it, but the Buick is definitely a different animal I'm not accustomed to. I've always had little Japanese cars, and this one's, well, a very large American-made SUV. But at any rate, of course, I always change the oil and stuff like that, change out the brakes when they start getting yonky. But there's other little things that, typically even people, who are religious about changing the oil, they don't always think to do or do at all. And it's one of those things, well, I don't want to pay someone to do these things, but so, I mean, that kind of stuff I do. But like I finished yesterday. I officially finished all of them, but in the past I've flushed out the power steering fluid, and then just yesterday I flushed the brake fluid, flushed the radiator coolant. That was a real fun adventure. Of course, changed the oil and filter, but not, I don't know, forget, maybe like it was about a year ago. I just drained and refilled the transmission fluid, just because it was, at first I thought it was oil. It was so black. I'm like, well, I'm not going to go flush it. That's probably not a good idea. Well, with the transmission problems that vehicle seems to have at times. So I just went ahead and just drained and filled it, But I mean, all that kind of stuff is, you don't have to do but every 3 to 5 years, depending on what it is. But finally got all that done. And it just got me thinking, there's probably a lot that could be talked about cars. And I'm not going to get into the maintenance, because that's really, I don't think, in the scope of the show. I mean, look, change your damn oil. You know what I mean? That's what you're supposed to do. I shouldn't have to tell you that. But when it comes to being a working musician, sometimes having a car can be kind of a difficult thing, because, you have to have a car to work and all that, or you have to have a car to get to your gigs and shows and practices and just doing stuff, right? But at the same time, you also have to have a way to transport gear from one show to another, from one practice space, just you name it. And so I thought about, I'm not sure if people have really done a whole lot about just talking about some good vehicles for musicians to buy, right? And obviously, this is going to be a little bit subjective, right? And this is just my opinion, but I think perhaps if you maybe trade one brand with another, perhaps you're a real big, I've had great luck with Chevys, so I'm going to stick with that. And that's fine. Don't let me tell you what to do, right? But there are a few things I think that, perhaps we haven't really thought about when it comes about car purchases and being a musician. Because I think people who are full-time musicians, think about this, and they generally know what they need. But at the same time, musicians usually are not the most financially viable people on the planet. Not to say that you can't make good money and be a musician. I make good money, but it's not, or a decent money, but I don't, it's not by being a musician. I work and then I'm a musician on the side, right? But still, if you are a working musician, as in you go out and you gig or anything like that, or you practice, there are some things to think about. And, well, granted, I'm not really in that game anymore. You don't really have to be to kind of explain some things to look out for and just what's needed. And plus, with all the people I know, I kind of see what they drive, and sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But I've just from my own personal experiences, what I've seen, witnessed, and heard, I came up with a few vehicles that I think are pretty good choices given different circumstances, right? So before I get onto that, I'm going to crack open one more of these frosty beverages. Oh yeah, that's the sign of freshness. I need another. Okay. So, just kind of as a precursor to everything I'm saying here, all the cars I'm going to be talking about I'm talking about used vehicles. I'm not talking about brand new ones. Of course, obviously, you can go new, but I'm talking about cars that are, very practical for people who have budgets. Because unfortunate thing about being a musician is you basically have extra stuff you got to buy that a lot of people don't, right? We all spend our money in different places, but in addition to having a car, you also have to have, musical stuff, and all that stuff costs money, and it breaks and has to be repaired and replaced, and it never seems to end. And you always want new stuff or different stuff, right? Seems like there's always something you just have to have gear related. So I figured the first car that I would talk about is in some way, it is actually one I've considered getting, not because I think it's the funnest car to drive or that it's a real fashion statement or that it's real cool or anything that I especially like about it, but I'm not usually the biggest fan of Mitsubishi, but they make the Mitsubishi Mirage. And I think it's their second or third time to release this vehicle. And it's always a little bit different. I think the last ones they released came out in like 2000 or something like that. And then, about 4 years ago, they came out with another, re-released the Mitsubishi Mirage, and it looks a little different. But basically, it looks like one of those little roller skate cars. It's one of those hatchbacks, but it's a two-door, or I guess technically a three-door if you count the hatchback. But it's basically a two-door hatchback. That's got a 78 horsepower, 3-cylinder engine, and the thing will, on the freeways going modest speeds in the summer, will easily get 50 plus miles to the gallon. I think it gets mixed somewhere around like 40 miles to the gallon, 42, mixed use, something like that. Assuming you don't drive it like a maniac, but with 78 horsepower, it's kind of hard to, you know what I mean? Which is something that I kind of love and hate about it. I mean, I've thought about getting one just as a means to get from point A to point B. I mean, it just, who cares? Like, I unless a car is a fashion statement to you, and I get it. Hey, I get it, what it's like to pull up at the pump next to somebody who has a very nice vehicle, and you're sitting there with your 15-year-old hoopty that's smoking. You know what I mean? I get it. But the truth is, cars are a very bad investment in every way, shape, and form, but it's something that you have to have. It's rolling depreciation. So if you can just get over the factor that your car, if you don't care about, if you can just make it to where your car is not a fashion statement to you and is not a representation of who you are, I think the Mitsubishi Mirage is a great vehicle, because I think new, they're like $12,000. So on the used market, you can find them for, they got 20,000 miles and cost like $6,000, $7,000. I mean, but generally they have between 20 and 40,000 miles and, under seven and around $7,000 and less, that kind of thing. Kind of hard to pass that up. Hell, 2-3-year-old car, 20,000 miles, and it costs somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000. I mean, that's just crazy. But the gas mileage is absolutely wonderful. Of course, I'm going to always recommend getting it in a manual transmission, although, to each their own. I just know that if you get them generally, if I had to say there's going to be a weak link in that car, it's going to be, a few things, but the transmission would be one of them. So, generally engine, transmission, and electronics. If you get a manual, you can generally guarantee you that you will not have major transmission problems. The other ones I cannot guarantee. However, this car does not have a lot of frills, so odds are the electronics will be okay. I would bet the engine is okay, but I'm willing to bet if it has issues, it'll be things like, front end shocks, that kind of stuff, struts, steering, little things like that. That are nuisances, not fun to have to fix or pay to have fixed, but they're nothing too crazy. I mean, hell, tires, yeah, but it's got like probably the tiniest tires known to man. I mean, basically, in a pinch, you just take them off your bicycle. There's not much difference. But one reason I like hatchbacks is because for a working musician, it's great. You always have extra space. You fold down the second row seats, and you can get a lot of stuff in there, and the gas mileage is great because a lot of stuff you have to do as a musician is driving from point A to point B, and it's not too uncommon to have to drive 60 miles one way for a gig. Sometimes you travel a little bit more, but you're generally traveling often. And, at some point you can only play all the places that are within 15-mile radius of you so many times, so often before it's not worth it. So generally you have to travel. And, granted, I mean, it might be a little tight for some situations, but let's say you're in a band and you're not the one you don't have to worry about PAs and all that kind of stuff. And even then, depending on what you play, you can get a whole drum set in there. You can get your your whole live bass rig in there, guitar rig, all that kind of stuff. Well, especially if you're a singer, you know, but depending on what you got to do, you should be able to, it should accommodate you, right? So while that's a good enough like starting point, that's like the cheapest you could possibly go. The only other thing about it that I should mention is apparently it's not the most, how do I say it? It's not the funnest car to drive on the freeway. You know what I mean? It's real lightweight and very underpowered. So sometimes it can be a little bit intimidating on the freeway from what I've heard, right? Or going up hills. So perhaps if you live in, I don't know, San Diego or San Francisco, maybe not the best vehicle for you, but you might want to step up into one of the other two types of cars I'm going to talk about, which are once again hatchbacks. And at this point, take your pick. I mean, Toyota, Scion, Yaris, I mean, you name it. They've got good ones. Mazda makes some that are pretty good. Yeah, Honda definitely makes some that are good. I would probably go with Toyota. And once again, if you like a standard transmission, I mean, you're much better off with a standard on those things. But whatever. The point is, the hatchback is really the bread and butter of the working musician. I mean, I can't tell you how many musicians have hatchbacks, and it's because they're cheap, they're very economical with gas mileage, and you can hold a lot of stuff in them, which is great. So, you know, you can't tow a trailer. They're, you know, it's kind of, at some point they are limited, but for what most people need to go from point A to point B with, you know, a Toyota or a Honda hatchback will do for you fine. And there's several different brands, but, you know, for example, I like Toyotas just because they last a long time. There's a Scion, there's a couple different varieties, the AB and like the XB or something. There's a Toyota Yaris, they have a hatchback. There's a Toyota Matrix. I mean, there's options out there. Of course, Honda has several. So I think that's a pretty good choice, right? And so another vehicle that I recently came across, I thought, whoa, this would be a pretty cool one too. It's like the strangest thing. I've never seen anything like it. It's the Mazda 5. So the Mazda 3 is kind of like a little, you know, like a Toyota Corolla, Honda Civic, but they also make and then the Mazda 6 is kind of like a Camry or an Accord, right? But the Mazda 5 is like a slightly smaller minivan. You'd have to see it to really grasp it, but it's basically a minivan. It's got the two sliding doors, right? And it's got three rows of seats, two kind of captain chairs, and then two chairs in the back that are kind of squished together. But it's kind of like a hatchback meets minivan combined. It's it's kind of like a small minivan, a smaller minivan, or a big car with a van on it. It's kind of hard to explain, but what's cool about it is, you know, it's got the sliding doors, and you can take out all the seats, I'm sure, if you wanted to, you know, or you have the second row seating so people can fit in there. You can actually take people, but then you can fold down the back, and so it just gives you that much extra cargo space to where, in theory, I think you could probably take you and three band members, and I think everybody could fit all their stuff in there. Now, depending on your PA and all that, you know, if your drummer insists on having a 25-piece kit, well, maybe not, but, you know, people are somewhat practical. Yeah, I mean, you can fit a full band setup in that thing. And the crazy thing is that they're 4 cylinders, right? And they get, you know, pretty darn good gas mileage. You know, on the freeway, they probably get upwards of 30 miles to the gallon, you know, on the freeway without not completely weighted down. Now, in this case, if there's 4 people in it and, you know, another 400 pounds of gear, you know, yeah, it's going to be pretty much taxed out. You're not going to get as good a gas mileage. But the point is, when you're driving it from day to day, you still get pretty good fuel economy. They're relatively inexpensive. I mean, this is another one of those, you know, $6,000-$7,000 vehicles that I've seen. And another thing that I really, really love about it is that it's got, up until 2015, you can find them in manual transmissions. So where are you going to find a standard transmission vehicle that's a minivan? Right? So it's a little bit smaller than most minivans, well, all minivans, but it's kind of, but at the same time, it's got the 3 rows of seats, which you would probably just completely take out or fold them all over. And you can basically go on a mini tour. You know what I mean? You can fit everything you would need in there. I mean, sparingly. Yeah, you might not be able to bring a full PA setup and giant guitar amps and giant bass rigs and tons. You might have to leave that second or third bass drum at home, Mr. Lars Ulrich. But you can do what you need to do, which I think is great, and it's a pretty good daily driver when fuel economy comes into play, and it's cheap. So, and the best part is you can get one in a standard transmission. So just one less thing to worry about when it comes to longevity of your vehicle. So that I came across, I'm like, I actually might be considering buying one. There's of the 2 cars I've really talked about. Of course, I talked about the more upgraded hatchbacks like the Matrix or the other ones, the Honda CR, whatever it is. Those are good choices. But the Mazda 5, I think, is like the little 4-cylinder minivan. I think is pretty cool option for musicians, and also that little Mitsubishi Mirage, just because they're so practical. And as far as a bang for your buck and a dollar and cents kind of thing, they get you from point A to point B, very low cost of ownership, and have the space to do what you need to do. Now, granted, the Mazda 5 is going to be a little bit more expensive than the stupid, Mitsubishi Mirage. That's to be expected, but it's much more capable of doing stuff. All right? Okay, now as we kind of go up the ladder here, I just want to kind of make this statement. I looked for cars that were good values and not terribly expensive, so I tried to find vehicles that were basically under $8,000, which is pretty cheap as far as cars go. But now, granted, some of the ones I've talked about I've seen for under $6,000, even under $5,000 at times. So, granted, this is pretty speculative and subjective after a certain point, but it is kind of hard to argue the fact that 4-cylinder hatchbacks are a great way to go for most musicians. Now, as far as which one you get, that's on you, but I would recommend a hatchback as a kind of a base minimum of where you should go, just because the extra storage you get. Granted, you don't have a trunk per se, but you have a combined trunk with your back seat, so it allows you to fit more big stuff, which is very, very useful when you're moving amps and things of that nature. I talk about that minivan a little bit because it's basically a hatchback on steroids, very good gas mileage, etc., and you can get in a standard transmission, which I think is great. And then as we kind of move up another step or two on the ladder, this is where it gets kind of hard to really pinpoint specifics, because there's so many little crossover SUVs out there, right? But to each their own. That's one of crossover SUVs. Everyone loves them. Hell, I have one. However, they also are kind of trendy right now and are kind of expensive. So it's kind of hard for me to want to recommend one. But of the ones I've looked at, I think that there is one in particular that I think is a good value, and is like, if I were in the market, this is what I would look for, right? And this is just my opinion. You don't have to agree with it, but hey, it's my show, and therefore I will voice my opinion. So I think the Toyota Highlander is a good choice. Now, granted, they are expensive new. No, I'm not talking about getting new stuff. I'm trying to keep this stuff under $8,000. But you can find 06s, mid-2000, Toyota Highlanders, and they'll have between 120, 160,000 miles on them. But that's going to be the case with just about any SUV that you look at. And there's 2 other things I like about the Toyota Highlander. One, they're Toyotas, and they tend to last a long time, so I wouldn't be too afraid of buying a Toyota That's 160,000 miles. Especially if I was in a position where I needed a larger vehicle, but that didn't necessarily have to be a daily driver, you know. But even if you were looking for one that's also a daily driver, another thing I like about the Toyota Highlander is it's a fairly large vehicle, but they also make them in 4 cylinders. It's not quite as common. So once again, you're going to get, not weighted down. You'll get at least mid 20, mile per gallon, maybe even higher if you're in the summer on the freeways in Texas. But, you'll get a good 25 miles to the gallon on the 4-cylinder. And they're not too terribly underpowered. No standard transmission option here, but if you just don't want to deal with a minivan, and I totally understand it, and maybe you live somewhere where you need to have a little bit more elevation because you live in the woods, all that, or you just don't want to be, spotted driving a minivan. I get it. I feel the same way. I don't want to drive a minivan, but the Mazda 5 makes me think differently because it's standard transmission. It's fun. But I think the Toyota Highlander is probably the best bang for the buck. Now, granted, you're going to have to get one that's going to be used, and it's going to be between 8 and 10 years old. But maybe even older. I'd say between 8 and 15 years old. But they've got a lot of space. And especially with the 4 cylinders, they're very, very good fuel economy and a lot of space, And I know that they will last quite a while. I mean, those things make it well past 200,000 miles, oftentimes past 300. So I can safely recommend that they're pretty good vehicles. And another thing I like about it is that, if you realize that, you might be in a position where you need to do some towing, because let's say you're going to do some, you have a serious setup, right? Or you want to have a trailer so that you don't have to load up your car with crap. You basically have your trailer set up in the garage or out somewhere. You just basically back your car up in your vehicle up to it and pull it out and you're ready to go. All right. So you don't have to constantly unload and load a truck, which is a pretty viable thing to do. Because if you gig a lot, man, I tell you, it sure is a pain in the butt loading and unloading equipment. But then it's an even bigger pain in the butt doing it once you get back to the house, because you're not just unloading it and loading it and then unloading, one time each. You're doing every step twice, because then you got to take it back out of your vehicle into your house. And that's a real pain. So especially for like the PA setups and all that kind of stuff, you just put it in a small, I would recommend like one of those like covered trailer things, a lot of, that's a very common thing to use. And you don't necessarily have to have a really big trailer for this, but something that's covered, that's fairly rugged and that's, lockable. The great thing is you can tow with one of these Highlanders. Now, if you're going to use your Highlander to tow, I would not recommend the 4-cylinder. In fact, they probably wouldn't recommend it either. At that point, you go ahead and upgrade to the 6-cylinder. That's just, I would recommend it unless you have a very, very small lightweight trailer. Just get and even then, just get the 6-cylinder, because they can be had for around the same price as the 4-cylinders. The gas mileage is not going to be quite as good. That's just how that goes. But, once you kind of get past the 4-cylinder range, well, that's just kind of how it is. You're not going to get 25 miles to the gallon anymore. You're going to get, 14 to 20 at best. Especially with a trailer, it'll be more like 14. But that's just kind of how that goes. It's still not bad gas mileage for towing. But at any rate, and the other reason I like that is if you do have the trailer, is you can have most of your stuff, that who cares if it deals with humidity, right? So you put all that stuff inside the trailer, put your guitars in the very back, that kind of thing. And you can go on your little mini tour, or everybody can ride in the vehicle comfortably. Right. And then when you're all done, you get home real late at night, or more so early in the morning, you don't have to worry so much about people breaking in your car. Because if you've got that trailer locked up pretty solid, which I would recommend you do, you don't have to worry about it. You go park your car and you're good. So another reason why I like that setup is be more so if you do need something that's like the size of a minivan, but you don't want to drive a minivan and you want to also have the option of towing. I think that's a pretty good way to go. Or another thing that could be considered is instead of doing the SUV route is do like the Toyota Sienna. That's probably the only minivan I would actually recommend buying other than the Mazda 5. And the Mazda 5, while it's a minivan, it's really not a minivan. It's not even really a van. It's basically the size of of like an SUV, right? But it's in the form of a minivan, if that makes sense. So while the minivan is not a full-size van, the Mazda 5 is not a full-size minivan. The Toyota Sienna is a full-size minivan, and that's probably the only one I would recommend. You can actually pull a little something with it, but I really wouldn't recommend it. But the one thing that's nice about the minivan is that you got space, you got enough power to drive anywhere, and the Siennas will last forever. And back when I was, a young working musician, I found we had a Ford Aerostar XL. This thing was huge. And I tell you, that thing was great. What we found actually was nice is we would take out the middle seats, which might seem kind of counterintuitive because, like, wouldn't you want to take out the back seat so you have more space in the back? I'm like, well, yes, that makes sense too. And sometimes we would do that. But when you take out the middle seats, what you'll find is that it's just when you're having to unload stuff, sometimes it just seemed like there was more times than not, it was just more convenient to put everything in the middle. And then what else is nice is you've got a couple people in the back seat that can kind of help hold things down or keep their eye on stuff because stuff will start shifting and they can go over there and move it. And it was just easier to get stuff in and out when you had the side doors because you know what I mean? You're not just having to load things from one direction. You can get at it from two directions. So there's less up and down getting in and out. And it seemed like, if memory serves me right, the back trunk hatch sat a little bit higher than the floorboard did where the sliding doors were. So it was also lower to the ground there, if memory serves me right. And I think that's the case with most vans. But nonetheless, I think a minivan, or vans in general, but in particular the minivan is a great option too, just because you can fit a lot of stuff, a lot of people, and everything's covered. And that's why I don't recommend trucks for this. I wouldn't recommend a truck unless y'all are pulling a massive, travel trailer with you that you go camp at while you're on a major tour. But at that point, I mean, I'm not really talking to you kind of people, but I mean, you could say, hey, if you also, everyone's needs are different. I'm not going to say don't buy a truck because yes, they pull a lot of stuff and they do a much better job of pulling things than generally anything else you're going to buy. But as far as daily drivers, they're not practical. Most people who drive trucks really don't need to drive trucks, but they're cool. Hey, I'd like a truck, but I'm just not willing to pay for one. They're overly expensive, in my opinion, because they're very desirable and high in demand. But, sure, you can put a lot of stuff in the back, but then you got to go buy, the point is it's not covered, which is a good thing and a bad thing because it's not covered. You can go a lot higher. You can stick outside the edge of the truck bed. That's nice. But the second it rains, not so good a thing. And generally, I don't know of too much musical gear that handles rain and water very well. So then you're looking at getting like a cab cover of some kind. And it's just, oh, geez. You might as well just bought a minivan. Hell, you know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense. So that's why I don't recommend trucks for musicians, And there are, hey, everyone's circumstances are different. If you need truck for your work, and it also, well, sure, that's what you're going to do. But as far as what the typical person, who has a job that doesn't require that as a requisite, trucks are not a good idea for working musicians. That, and a lot of times you got to park in kind of like downtown city lots, and yeah, good luck trying to back in your F-250, buddy. Yeah, that's real fun. So I mentioned the Mitsubishi Mirage from the extreme low end, very small but practical. And of course, its bigger brothers and sisters, like, for example, the Toyota Matrix, etc. Talked about the Mazda 5 minivan, pretty good one. Talked about the Toyota Highlander SUV in both the 4 and 6 cylinder models. And talked about the minivan of the Toyota Sienna, the only minivan I would ever consider buying. Now, I told you I don't recommend trucks. I don't recommend them. The reason why is if you do need something that has some serious hauling power, like let's say you're doing a big tour, right? And you're pulling around a good sized trailer with all your gear and all that kind of stuff in it. The reason why I don't recommend trucks is realistically, you could put 5 people in them, right? But I think there's a better option that people don't always think about. And there's really it's a full size van, but there's really only one of them that I would recommend. I mean, Nissan makes them. A lot of people make them, but I think Ford makes the best one. They make a 350 wagon of sorts, but it's basically a passenger wagon. And there's some that, the typical one has 4 seats, right? But it'll have the front row and then an additional 3 rows behind it. But they have like an XLT version or something like that, which I think is awesome. It's got, instead of having the front row and plus an additional 3 rows, this one has an additional 4. It's even longer. So if you kind of get where I'm going with this, obviously you don't need that many seats necessarily, but if you did, you could sleep in that van 6 people, I guess, 2 up front and 4 in the back, right? 6 people could sleep there if you in a pinch, you know what I mean? Another thing is you could also take some of those back seats out or middle seats out and just have a ton of cargo space. And on top of it, they're generally, basically F-350s and, but in van form. So these things, although they're typically gas, they're, from my experience, especially on some of the cargo ones, you can get diesel, but you can't you could customize it, but they don't usually generally come with seating, you know what I mean? They're just kind of empty. But as far as the diesel E350s, but yeah, the Ford, I think it's the E350 passenger, like XLT, I think is pretty badass for a musician, because they can be had for, reasonably cheap. They're going to have some miles on them, but they hold up. That's what they're designed to do, is move people back and forth all day, every day. And the greatest thing about it is like the mecca of a band mobile. You know what I mean? Maybe not the world's best daily driver, because you're talking about a very beefy V8 engine. We're talking about a serious truck engine, 8-cylinder, but it's just huge. I mean, I am totally in love with this. Like if you're, this is the kind of thing where, all right, guys, we're going to be on a tour. We're going to be doing this, that, and the other thing, and you don't want to have to always try to find a place to, like a motel or a place to crash. You can crash in the van, and on its own merits, you can put, even if this was just a local gig and you're not touring, you can put everything gear-wise that you own and need, including PA, inside that van, and put the band in there and get to the gig. So it's super awesome for that. And if you need to tow a trailer, you can do that. So hell, if you wanted to, you could tow a trailer, like a camper, with you on to your gigs, right? And those of you who know how this works, there's always some place to camp, and it's usually fairly inexpensive. Usually anywhere from, and if you have, if you're a KOA member, but generally $20-$30, to camp somewhere for a night, and you have water and electricity, a whole lot cheaper than motel. Now you could say that you have to also factor in the cost that you're having to pay to lug this thing around, more gas mileage, and yeah, there's something to be said about that. But you could also say, you get to let's say you're going to go do a gig out in Louisiana, and you're from Texas, so you're going to go find a place to camp, right? Put it there, and then go to your gig every night, come back and sleep there. Or if you're in a pinch, you're just going to be doing like a week-long tour. I mean, you could just sleep in the van. You know what I mean? Hey, people have done it. That's not too uncommon. And this, I think, as far as like, you really want to be a road warrior musician, I think the E350 XLT passenger wagon is about as ideal as it gets for that, especially if you need to move a lot of gear and you got a lot of people in it. Now, if it's three or a three-piece, you could get away with probably the minivan. But I'm telling you, as far as about as big as I would go up until you just flat out get a bus, would be that Ford E350. So I think that pretty much covers it. I know this isn't quite as music related, but I think it is. I think this is definitely, I'm proud of this show. Maybe I could have done it a little better, done it more justice, but what I can say is I haven't heard other podcasts that are music related talking about what kind of cars are good for musicians. And I think that's the kind of thing that, a musician needs to think about. It not constantly, obviously there's other things you need to worry about too, but it's just something to be aware of that, hey, you got to have a vehicle. And if you're going to be a musician and try to do anything with it, you might also need a vehicle that works for that. All right. So while you're in the market for a vehicle, I just kind of hopefully gave you some food for thought so you can make at least an informed purchasing decision. All right. I appreciate you guys hanging in there, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.